Hello and welcome to the Wedding Field Trip podcast, where we believe that your wedding day should be stress-free and fun from start to finish. I'm your host, Amanda Soriano, a Toronto wedding photographer, and I'm here to share some amazing, picturesque, unique, and most importantly, fun ideas for your wedding day. All right, so you've found your venue, you've put in the deposit, and that's all done. Congratulations. That's one of the biggest things on the checklist that needs to be done. And so you finished it. So I hope you had a glass of wine or however you like to celebrate, because that's one of the biggest things. Now it's time to hire a wedding photographer. I remember when I was a bride how exhausting the experience was looking for a wedding photographer. And that's because there are millions and millions out there, which is, a good and challenge at the same time. I feel you. I was there. And so here are some tips that I wish I had when I was hiring that I hope will help you. So my first tip is to ask any photographer you're considering for a full length album. Having full day length albums is so helpful because it gives you a general idea of how photographers approach shooting and their editing style. And beyond that, it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect if you decide to hire them. When you're paying attention to their shooting style, take note of whether the photos feel more documentary or posed. Some photographers do a little bit of both, like myself, and some photographers really focus on, like the documentary style, where they go into your wedding day and they don't interact with you at all. They're just like a fly on the wall, and that works for many couples. And so if that's what you're looking for, take note of that in their album. And on the other extreme, you have photographers who care more about the poses and, setting things up to feel very editorial, like something straight out of a magazine. For me, when I was looking for my wedding photographer, I kind of wanted a little bit of both. Like I wanted somebody who would be able to work with someone like me and really bring out my authentic personality in photos. And so pay attention to that. Look at the photos of the people. Do people look comfortable? Are they awkward, or do they look rigid and unnatural? Because chances are, if you hire that photographer, you'll get something similar. And so pay attention to their shooting style when you're going through the albums. The second thing I tell couples to pay attention to is the editing style. When you're looking at editing style, you will notice there are 3 different types of buckets. You have the dark and moody photographers, the bright and airy, and then you have the people who sit kind of in the middle with their true to life colors. And so for me, when I was hiring my wedding photographer, I cared about hiring someone who is in the middle because I come from a really diverse family. I have people from the Philippines, from Chile, and my group of friends is fairly diverse. And so I really cared about hiring somebody who would take in all of the colors of the day, all of the people and their skin tones, and really honor what everything looked like at a glance. I don't know if you've ever had a friend kind of slap on a filter on a picture of a group of friends and then, 5 people look super amazing and tanned while, you have racialized folks like me look super orange and, they've been out in the sun for too long. And so that is something I definitely didn't want on my wedding day. And so I really cared about hiring someone who would be able to see how people showed up in photos and use their technical skills to capture them in the best way possible. And sometimes that comes down to what kind of light they use. So whether it be artificial light or natural light, basically in order to capture accurate skin tones, you need to have proper knowledge of light. And so both types of light work great, but it's just a matter of how they use it. And so pay attention to the full length albums and look for diverse folks like me and see whether they look, how you imagine them looking. Take a look at pictures of them in the day, inside, outside, inside after the sun sets, because paying attention to that sort of thing will really make a difference when you look back on your photos. Something that I always do as a photographer is I try to share photos of couples that look similar to the couples inquiring. And I do this because not only do I want people to feel seen in my work, but I also want them to know what they can expect from working with someone like me in terms of editing style. I think all photographers should do this. And so if you're a photographer listening to this podcast, write this down, because I've unfortunately been burned in the past where I've hired a photographer who didn't edit me or capture me in how I felt was authentically me. And so, as a result, I got photos that didn't feel like me. And so It's such a shitty feeling, I'll be honest, to, get really excited about photos and then get them back and you feel like, you're green or yellow or purple or blue. All unnatural skin tones. And so, if you're a racialized person like myself, really pay attention to how photographers take photos of people who look like you. And not just take photos of you, but how they edit those photos as well. And so, those are my tips around assessing shooting and editing styles when you're going through these portfolios. But in addition to browsing portfolios, what is also important to consider when hiring a photographer is the entire client experience and how they approach their wedding photography business. Some photographers will really take your lead when it comes to the photography of the day. They'll wait for you to share a timeline with them, and then from there, they'll ask questions as needed. Some photographers will have an entire client experience drawn out from beginning to end. And so, just so that you can get a sense for what that could potentially look like, I'll share what my client experience looks like. So, for me, once couples decide they want to work with me, what I'll do is I'll invite them to a kickoff call. And so, during this kickoff call, I'll introduce all of the resources that they have access to, which includes my wedding experience guide, which has tons of tips for planning your day with photography in mind. It also includes my preferred vendor list and a bunch of links to book appointments if they want to reach out to me. I love having a kickoff call because we also set a bunch of appointments in advance. And I do this because I never want my clients to feel like I've forgotten about them or that they don't know when we're going to talk next. And so doing that right at the beginning kind of sets the tone. And of course, they know exactly where to go if they need to book any type of call or appointment with me. After the kickoff call, we start planning their engagement session if they have one. If they don't, then we plan a hangout. For me, I love hanging out with my couples because it takes us from strangers to more friends. And I find like the more you trust your photographer and the more you're comfortable with them, the more you'll have your unique personality represented in the photographs. Plus, it's a business expense and it's a great opportunity for me to try new foods. And so it's a win-win all around. But after the engagement shoot, what I tell my couples is that 90 days before their wedding, they'll receive a wedding day questionnaire. And that questionnaire will essentially give me all of the answers I need for their wedding day. It gives me an idea of what the timeline will look like and where different things are taking place. So that way, when we get on our wedding support call, which takes place a month before the wedding, I have a photo schedule and a bunch of questions for me to go through with them. And then after the 1 month wedding support call, where we go through the photo schedule I put together, we go back and forth on email until the schedule is perfect and super aligned with how they envisioned their day. Many of my couples also work with planners, and so they're always invited to the wedding support calls as well. Now, if your photographer doesn't share how they support couples throughout the experience on their website, then definitely write down a couple of questions for when you do connect with them on the phone. A great question you can ask during a discovery call is, do you help couples with the schedule and photo locations, and what does that look like in terms of the lead up to the wedding day? And so those are the two extreme types of support that you can expect from a wedding photographer. You can have the person who, after you paid your deposit and have signed a contract with, who will essentially just show up on your wedding day to take photos and deliver them afterwards. Or you'll have the person who is with you each step of the way, helping you guide and put together the schedule of your dreams and basically be a safe person to connect with if you have any questions at all. Now, before I wrap this episode up, here are some tips around ensuring that your photographer knows how to protect your images, because the last thing you need is to lose your entire wedding album due to, an SD malfunctioning, a hard drive malfunctioning, a camera not working on the day of your wedding. And so here are some things to look out for when hiring as well. These can be questions you ask in an email or during a discovery call. But the first thing I would ask is, what do you shoot on? And does it shoot dual card slots? So I don't like, to be honest, you don't need to know what kind of camera they shoot on, because if you've seen their work, you know the quality of their work. And unless you're a technical nerd like that, like I am, then you don't actually need to ask that question. But what is important is asking whether their camera has dual card slots. Cameras with dual card slots are able to record to 2 different cards. And so every time you take one photo, it is automatically copied to the second card slot. And this is great because I don't know if you have experience, but SDs malfunction. Thankfully, knock on wood, it hasn't happened to me, but I sleep. I'm able to sleep at night knowing that I have that backup SD card. But that is just the first layer of protection. And by all means, for me, I do many layers because that's the last thing I want in my business too as a photographer. And so the second thing you can ask is, how do you back up or protect our images? And so just to give you some background on how I protect all of my images is I never delete photos off the SD card until I deliver the full album. And so that's one layer of protection. The second thing I do is I back up all of the images to 2 different hard drives. And so the 2 hard drives, one is at my house and one is at my parents' house, who live really close by. And so that is another way that I protect my image. But then lastly, what I also do is I back it up to the cloud. And so I've shared how I do this with other photographers, and they think I'm I've lost my mind. But for me, honestly, it helps me sleep at night and I never have to worry because I've had some hard drives die on me. And so I now have trust issues. And so for me, the more the merrier. And when I share the photos with my clients, I keep the albums on my website for a minimum of 1 year. And I will never delete an album without telling my couples first. And so that's kind of how I go about protecting my photos. And so if you hear of your photographer kind of working a similar way, then that's a good sign because technology isn't always trustworthy. And there are many ways to protect yourself from that sort of thing. And so anyways, that is all. This episode was fairly long, and so I hope you found it helpful and that you had a lot of tips that you wrote down for when you are ready to hire your photographer. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm Amanda Soriano Photo on Instagram, and I would love to hear from you. And so with that, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And if you're looking for a wedding photographer and you are having your wedding in Toronto, I would love to hear from you. All the best. I'll see you in 2 weeks, and take care.